Edwin Parker had built his life around quiet predictability. Every morning, he left his small Glendale apartment at exactly 7:30, coffee in one hand, keys in the other, the sun already spilling gold across the empty parking lot. He worked in logistics, a job that demanded spreadsheets, schedules, and the kind of calm that came from knowing what was supposed to happen next. That calm was what he valued most. 3 years earlier, that calm had been shattered in the screech of metal and glass. The accident hadn't been spectacular, not the sort that made headlines, but it left him broken enough to question how fragile ordinary days could be. And then there was her, Chris. He didn't remember much from those first hours in the hospital. White lights, morphine, voices that blurred into one another. But he remembered her face. Her calm tone. The way she spoke to him as if nothing terrible had happened, as if breathing itself was still something worth doing. She had stayed longer than she needed to, bringing him water, adjusting the light so it wouldn't hit his eyes, making small jokes that cut through the pain. After he was discharged, he thought about calling her, maybe to say thank you, maybe to say something else. He never did. Life resumed its careful order. Work, home, sleep. Days stacked on top of one another, smooth and unremarkable. Until that afternoon at the mall. It was supposed to be a quick errand, a new pair of headphones, nothing more. Edwin wasn't the kind of man who lingered in malls, but the air conditioning was welcome after the warm October sun. Music played softly through hidden speakers, people passed with shopping bags and laughter, and everything felt comfortably anonymous. He was halfway past a bookstore when he heard it, a voice. Familiar, clear, threaded with the same calm warmth he remembered from the hospital. "Sorry, could you grab one more box from the back?" He froze. It couldn't be. When he turned, the noise of the mall seemed to fade. She stood by a counter in a small gift shop, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled to her elbows, smiling at a customer. For a second, the years folded into nothing. Chris. He waited, uncertain, then stepped closer, pretending to look at a shelf of greeting cards. His heart thudded in his chest, ridiculous, he thought, how a voice could still do that. When she looked up and saw him, the recognition was instant. Her eyes widened, and then her smile, that same quiet, steady smile, spread across her face. "Edwin." "Yeah," he said, almost laughing. "Didn't think I'd ever run into you again." "Me neither," she said. "Wow, it's been what, 3 years?" "Just about." They stood there, grinning like old friends who'd stumbled into the past. The conversation came easy, light. She told him she'd left the hospital a year ago, now working part-time while studying for a new certification. He told her about work, about Glendale, about how he still hated rush hour on the 134. When a line started forming behind her, she glanced over apologetically. "Would you mind waiting a few minutes? My shift ends soon." "Not at all," he said. "I'll be right here." 15 minutes later, they walked side by side through the mall. The sun had shifted, and the glass ceiling above scattered light across the floor. "There's a coffee place downstairs," he said, "if you've got time." She looked at him, a small pause, then a nod. "Yeah, I'd like that." And just like that, the quiet rhythm of his life cracked open again. The cafe wasn't anything special, small, half-hidden near the mall exit, the kind of place people passed without noticing. But to Edwin, it felt like a small pocket of quiet after too much noise. They took a table by the window. Afternoon light spilled across the wood, turning her hair to copper. Chris ordered a latte, he black coffee, no sugar, no cream, the same way he always had it. For a while, they talked about everything and nothing. The weather, the ridiculous parking situation, the kind of small talk that, strangely, didn't feel small at all. "So, logistics," she said, stirring her drink, "still organizing the world one box at a time." He smiled. Someone got to make sure the chaos stays in order. She laughed, a quiet sound, but it reached him in a way most things didn't. He asked about her, the hospital, her studies, the move. She told him she'd switched departments before finally leaving, that she wanted a slower pace, fewer night shifts, fewer emergencies. It's strange, she said, tracing the edge of her cup. You spend years fixing people, and then one day you realize you've forgotten how to fix yourself. Edwin looked at her for a long moment. You seemed fine to me back then. Yeah, she said softly. That's the trick. They both smiled at that, not out of amusement, but understanding. The conversation drifted. They remembered fragments from the hospital, her teasing him about his stubbornness, his refusal to take pain meds. She remembered how he always thanked every nurse, every time. Guess I was just grateful to still be breathing, he said. She nodded. Gratitude looks good on you. He laughed quietly, shaking his head. You say that to all your former patients. Only the ones who buy me coffee, she said. When they finally stood to leave, 2 hours had passed without either of them noticing. Outside, the sun was low, the day already folding into evening. He hesitated before speaking. Would it be weird if I asked for your number? Her answer was simple, a small smile, a quick nod. Not weird at all. She typed her number into his phone, handed it back and said, Text me sometime. He did later that night. Just one line. Glad we ran into each other today. Her reply came a few minutes later. Me too, Edwin. It felt good. It happened a week later. A quiet Saturday morning, sunlight already climbing through the city haze when Chris texted. Coffee, same place, or you'll make me pick somewhere with worse pastries. He smiled at the screen, typed back, same place. You pick the pastries, I'll pretend to know what I'm doing. When he arrived, she was already there, sitting at the corner table, hair down this time, scrolling through her phone with that soft half-focus people get when they're lost in their thoughts. She looked up and saw him, and that was enough. Hey, punctual as always, she said. Occupational hazard, he replied. We live by the clock. She slid a croissant toward him, then take a break from living by it. They ate, talked, and laughed. The kind of laughter that wasn't about jokes, but about how easy it suddenly felt to exist near each other. This time, the conversation went deeper without either of them forcing it. She told him about growing up near Monterey, about how she missed the ocean but not the fog, about how nursing had been both her calling and her undoing, too much giving, too little left for herself. He told her about his accident, the part he'd left out before, how he'd spent months learning to drive again, how silence had started to feel safer than company. I think that's why I liked the hospital, he said. No one expected you to be fine there. She looked at him, really looked. You were scared. He nodded. Still am sometimes. She leaned back, folded her hands around her cup. Yeah, me too. The honesty between them felt weightless, but grounding. There was no rush, no declaration, just the quiet, mutual realization that they'd found something they didn't know they'd been missing. When they left, they walked without hurry, wandering through a nearby park. The leaves were beginning to turn, rust and gold scattered across the path. At one point, a gust of wind sent a swirl of leaves past them, and Chris laughed, a sound so open and alive that Edwin couldn't help but smile. What? She asked, still laughing. Nothing, he said. Just nice to hear you sound like that. She looked at him, the laughter softening into something gentler. Then maybe I should laugh more often. And for the first time in a long while, Edwin thought maybe he should, too. What began as coffee, once a week quietly became something more. Text messages between shifts, evening calls that started with just 5 minutes and ended an hour later, shared playlists, little jokes about the world outside their small circle. Sometimes they met after work, walking through quiet neighborhoods, talking about things that didn't need fixing. One night, sitting by the Riverwalk, Chris told him about her marriage, the short, painful kind that leaves more silence than scars. He was good at being absent, she said, eyes on the water. The kind of person who could make you feel lonely while standing right next to you. Edwin didn't try to fix it, didn't offer the usual reassurances. He just listened. And in that stillness, she realized how rare it was to be heard without interruption. Another night, he told her about the months after his accident, How he'd wake up at 3 a.m. just to drive aimlessly, afraid to fall asleep and dream of the crash again. I think I forgot how to be part of the world, he admitted. She touched his hand, light, brief, but grounding. You found your way back. Maybe, he said. Or maybe I just got lucky and ran into someone who reminded me how. Their connection wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. There were no grand gestures, no sweeping confessions, just small, consistent moments that began to form a pattern. Her coffee waiting for him when he arrived, his text checking if she'd eaten, the warmth of her voice saying goodnight. Sometimes they'd drive with no destination, windows down, silence between them comfortable and full. Other times, they'd sit in her small apartment, cooking together, him cutting vegetables too slowly, her teasing him for it. It wasn't love yet, not exactly. But it was everything love grows out of: care, curiosity, patience. And though neither said it aloud, both of them started to feel the quiet shift, that subtle knowing that something was beginning, whether they were ready or not. It started small, almost unnoticeable. A missed text here, a delayed reply there. Chris still smiled when they met, still asked about his week, but something behind her eyes had shifted, a kind of guardedness, like she was holding something back to keep it safe. Edwin felt it before he understood it. The pauses, the way she'd changed the subject when the talk drifted too close to feelings. One night, as they sat in her living room, he finally said it. You've been quiet lately. She looked up from her tea, expression unreadable. Have I? Yeah, he said softly. Not in a bad way, just distant. Chris set her cup down, took a breath. I don't mean to be. It's just, sometimes I get scared when things start feeling good. He waited. I've done this before, she continued. Let someone in, let it feel easy, and it always somehow ends the same way. Edwin nodded slowly. You think this will, too? I don't know, she said. But if it does, I'd rather not have to rebuild again. The honesty in her voice wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, raw, stripped of pretense. He wanted to reach out, to promise her it would be different, but promises felt too heavy for what they were still learning to hold. So instead, he said, we don't have to rush anything. I'm not going anywhere. She smiled, small, uncertain. You say that like you mean it. I do. They sat in silence after that. Outside, the city hummed faintly, a siren in the distance, the hum of late traffic. Inside, the air was still, two people learning how to sit beside their fear without running from it. When he left that night, she walked him to the door. Thanks for staying patient, she said. He met her eyes. Patience is kind of my thing. She laughed quietly. Yeah, I noticed. He smiled, kissed her cheek, just enough to mean I understand. And though she smiled back, he could feel it. The walls she'd rebuilt, brick by careful brick. After that night, they didn't talk about fear again, not directly. Instead, they began to move through it, quietly, like travelers learning the rhythm of a road they didn't quite trust, but refused to leave. Chris still had her moments, days when she'd retreat into herself, when her replies came late or her tone grew distant. But now, Edwin didn't press. He showed up anyway, a small text, a quiet visit, a cup of coffee left on her porch before work. And slowly, something in her began to ease. They started spending more time together, cooking dinner, watching movies neither of them fully paid attention to. The kind of evenings where words weren't necessary, where the silence between them wasn't empty, but full of something fragile and real. One night, after a long day, she fell asleep on the couch with her head against his shoulder. The TV murmured softly in the background, and for the first time in years, Edwin felt completely still. He didn't move, didn't want to. He just watched the soft rhythm of her breathing and thought, this is what peace feels like. Later, when she woke up, she blinked sleepily and whispered, sorry. For what? He asked. For trusting you enough to fall asleep like that. He smiled. You make it sound like a crime. It kind of feels like one, she said, half laughing, but maybe a good kind. In the weeks that followed, small rituals formed between them. Sunday morning breakfasts, midweek walks through the park, evenings spent on her balcony, trading stories under the dim glow of string lights she'd hung years ago but rarely turned on. Once, as they stood out there, she said, "You ever think about how weird it is that people find each other twice? Like, we already met once years ago, and then somehow the world just put us back in the same place." "Maybe the world doesn't like unfinished stories," he said. She looked at him, smiled quietly. "Maybe not. They didn't call it love, not yet." But when he brushed a strand of hair from her face, and she leaned into his hand without thinking, it didn't need a name. It was already enough. It was an ordinary Thursday, dinner at her place, pasta simmering on the stove, music low in the background. The kind of evening that had started to feel like theirs. Chris was cutting vegetables while Edwin set the table, humming off-key to a song he barely knew. Everything felt light, easy, until her phone buzzed. Just once. A soft vibration against the counter. She glanced at it, froze for half a second, then turned it face down. That single gesture, small, deliberate, changed the air in the room. Edwin didn't ask right away. He tried to keep talking, joking about his clumsy knife skills, but her laughter didn't quite reach her eyes. The silence that followed wasn't new, but this one carried a weight neither of them wanted to name. Finally, he said, "Everything okay?" She hesitated. "Yeah, just a message from Tom." The name landed like a dull thud. Her ex-husband. They'd talked about him before briefly, carefully, but never like this. "Oh," Edwin said quietly. "What about?" "Nothing important," she replied too quickly. "Just something about taxes, paperwork stuff." He nodded, but something inside him tightened anyway. Not anger, more like that old, familiar ache of being reminded that love, even new love, can have ghosts. They ate in near silence after that. The clink of forks, the sound of the rain starting outside, the steady hum of a thought neither dared to voice. When they finished, she began gathering the dishes, but he stopped her. "Chris," he said, "you don't have to hide things from me." She looked up startled. "I'm not." "You are," he said, gently but firm. "And it's okay. I get it. I just don't want to be another person you keep at arm's length." For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she whispered, "It's not about you, Edwin. It's about me still learning how not to look over my shoulder." He nodded. "Then let me be here while you learn." Her eyes softened, but fear lingered there, quiet and real. "I don't want to hurt you," she said. "Then don't," he said simply. The rain outside thickened, tapping against the windows. She looked down, then up again, as if searching for something in his face she could still trust. "I need a little time," she said, "just to clear my head." He nodded, though the word time echoed like distance. When he left that night, her lights stayed on long after he drove away. And for the first time since they'd found each other again, the silence between them felt like something that might not heal on its own. 2 days passed without a word. Edwin kept glancing at his phone, resisting the urge to text her, to break the quiet she'd asked for. But when he finally saw her message, simple, tentative, his chest lifted. "I'm ready to talk." He drove to her apartment that evening, windows down, letting the city hum calm him. She opened the door looking tired, eyes still edged with that lingering worry. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I didn't mean to pull away." "You don't have to apologize," he said softly. "I just want honesty, that's all I need." She stepped inside, hesitated, then let herself exhale. "I like you," she said quietly, "more than I've liked anyone in a long time, and it scares me." Edwin smiled gently. "I get it, but we don't need to fix it, we just keep showing up. That's enough." Her hand found his, fingers curling around his as naturally as breathing. "Okay," she whispered. They sat together on her couch, talking, really talking, about the fear, the distance, the unspoken doubts. And slowly, the tension in her shoulders melted. He didn't try to solve anything, he just stayed. By the time he left, the city lights outside were reflected in her calm eyes. A quiet hug at the door, brief but warm, said more than words ever could. From that night on, the space between them shrank. The silences were no longer heavy with worry, but soft with trust. Little rituals returned: coffee, walks, laughter over burnt toast. And each day, the bond they had carefully built grew a little stronger, a little steadier. It wasn't perfection, it wasn't fireworks. It was trust, closeness, and the shared knowledge that they would both choose each other again and again, no matter the shadows of the past. Their days settled into a quiet rhythm, gentle but unshakable. Sunday mornings meant breakfast together, sometimes scrambled eggs, sometimes coffee and toast, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence while the sun streamed through the windows. Chris often wore one of Edwin's old shirts, laughing when it hung loose and long, while he pretended to be annoyed at her clumsiness with the frying pan. Midweek, they'd take aimless drives, music playing low, windows down, the city humming around them. She'd glance at him from the passenger seat, eyes soft, then quickly look away, pretending to adjust the seatbelt. And he'd smile, because those small glances spoke more than words ever could. Evenings found them on her balcony or his living room couch, sharing stories about patience, work, childhood memories, regrets, the little things they'd never told anyone else. Sometimes she'd fall asleep against his shoulder. Sometimes he'd trace patterns on her hand while she recounted a shift that had made her laugh despite exhaustion. Arguments, when they happened, were minor, over grocery lists or which movie to watch. But even then, they ended with laughter, soft kisses, or a quiet agreement that neither needed to be right, just together. They sent each other small messages throughout the day. "Survived another logistics meltdown," he'd type. "Good, I was about to page you to the ER again," she'd reply. There was a comfort in this, the kind of connection that didn't demand constant proof or dramatic declarations. Over time, even ordinary moments felt extraordinary. Folding laundry together, cooking dinner, sipping coffee in the early morning light, each gesture, each shared glance became a quiet testament to the bond they'd built. Love, Edwin realized, wasn't always grand. It was in the small acts, the repeated presence, the consistency. It was in showing up. Every day. On quiet evenings, they often sat on the balcony, looking out over the city lights. The hum of cars, the faint laughter from nearby streets, the occasional bark of a dog, it all felt like a gentle reminder that life kept moving, but for once, they weren't rushing. Edwin sometimes thought about the day in the mall when he'd first seen her again. A split second, a voice behind him, and everything had shifted. He realized how close he had been to missing it entirely. Chris noticed these moments in him, and often teased. "Still thinking about that Jell-O, Mr. Skeptic." He laughed, every day, but it wasn't really the Jell-O, was it? "No," she said softly, "it was you." They talked about the future sometimes, not with fear or pressure, but with quiet intention. A house that felt like theirs, maybe closer to the coast someday, a small clinic she dreamed of opening for the community. And he would help logistics, planning, anything to make it real. Sometimes strangers would ask them how they met. They shared a look, half amusement, half disbelief. "He was my patient," she would say, grinning. "And somehow he became my favorite part of life." Edwin would smile, remembering how true that felt. She had saved him twice, once in the hospital, and again by being part of his life. They had learned that love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It was about showing up, day after day, about trust, patience, and finding someone who truly saw you. And in that quiet gratitude, they realized how rare it was to find something honest and lasting. The world might rush by, but they had stopped together and finally, completely, chosen each other. Life hadn't given them a fairy tale, but it had given them something far better. A shared story, built slowly, carefully, one day at a time.